This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
We are getting to the end of the road here. Another year of classic wrestling soon to be documented here on the FSWR channel. I have no idea what the future holds when it comes to where a lot of this archive content will end up. But as long as I still have the ability to talk about it, you bet I'm going to. They tried to stop me with retro NXT, but we persevered. And by that, I mean we just stopped talking about NXT. So, in fact, they did stop me. But did I cry about it? Absolutely not. I just said, you know what? It wasn't meant to be. And who knows? I may consider going back to the retro NXT reports if any of that old archive footage becomes available for public domain use. I know it won't be on Peacock, but who knows? Maybe a Christmas miracle will happen and Netflix will pick up the slack. Gives me more of a reason to consider a Netflix subscription in the coming year. Don't give your hopes up. But ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It is the FSWR podcast. We are here on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays for new shows and new coverage. Make sure you subscribe, comment, and like the show for me. If you are a fan of classic wrestling and you love going back to relive the old times, we are the wrestling podcast you need. Our mantra is the wrestling channel nobody knows but everybody needs. And we are sticking with that slogan. It is quirky, self-deprecating, and witty. Now, I did mention retro NXT a minute ago, but as you can see, that's not what we cover here on the Friday show. We're digging into territory coverage today. And WCW. Yeah, I always say territory reviews, but it's not really accurate to call the NWA a regional territory like a World Class or a Midsouth. I mean, they're territorial in terms of their studio home base in Atlanta and the kind of market they were a primary driving force for throughout the 80s. But to say WCW at this point was a territory in the classical sense, not entirely accurate. But here's a big question. How bogged down am I going to get with the detail on this Superstation episode? Hopefully not too much. We are a week out from Starrcade, so if ever there was a show to sell some last-minute buys, this is the place to do it. And I've pretty much said all there is to say about the majority of these feuds. Even though it's been a weird roller coaster ride of solidifying a lot of these matches. I mean, just the entire fall of 1988. It's just one giant mess of a timeline. Like teasing feuds that never had any real substantial payoff. Guys cutting promos to hype up matches that either never happened or we never saw. Did they actually ever do Ric Flair versus Bam Bam Bigelow for the World Heavyweight title? Fuck if I know. But they were sure promoting it for about 8 weeks. Oh yeah, and there was also the whole sale. That was a minute little detail. Yeah, like I said, there's really not much to say about this week's program. And it was a full 2-hour episode. The big changeover we've seen in terms of formatting is that they're really cutting back on promo time. I think last week, 75% of the show was nothing but straight squash matches, plus the occasional pre-taped interview. I think we had something like 3 actual promos conducted at the podium in-house. So make of that as you will. If you were a big proponent of the wacky goofball promos, well, you're about to see considerably less of it. As far as Bob Eaton and Stan Lane versus Bob Emery and Mike Simani goes, aside from Cornette's ring intro for the Midnights, it sounded like he was recording his promo from a glass bowl. You know, it was a chance for Cornette to hard sell the pay-per-view match one last time, basically promising that they were going to humiliate Paulie's Midnights and make sure everybody globally knows who the real Midnight Express are. He did let us know that they're not good guys or bad guys. They've lost plenty of trust when it comes to relationships with the top baby faces like Sting and Dusty Rhodes and even Lex Luger. But that's fine. Whether the people love him or hate him, they can't deny that the Midnights are the best tag team in wrestling today. They're set to prove that at Starrcade in a week. That's really all I had to say about the segment. Stan and Bobby beat up the job guys for a while and won with their Vegematic. I still wish Stan would quit doing the karate kicks, but man, I've been barking up that tree since '87. It's especially funny when you see the jobbers have no clue how to sell any of it. Then it looks both fake and hilarious. Then we came back for the Russian Assassins versus the Italian Stallion and Terry Jones. Paul Jones dressed like a substitute teacher at the local high school this week. It's so rare you actually see Paul Jones dressed up. I can't even recall the last time I saw him wear a necktie. And he was at the booth talking about the Junkyard Dog a little bit. Meanwhile, the Assassins did some boring moves for a while and eventually went over after one of the Assassins gave Jones an illegal headbutt. That's Terry Jones, not Paul Jones. Too many pronouns, pal. I liked at the one point in this match, JR brought up some of the recent bad weather conditions that were going on in Russia around this time. Can't remember if it was a hurricane or what. But he just casually mentions Paul Jones not letting the Russians go back overseas to check on their loved ones. I just thought, you know, that's kind of a dick move. It actually makes you kind of feel sympathy for the Russian assassins here. Paul not letting them go home to check on their family members. What an asshole. Come on, man. Everybody knows Jack Victory had relatives in Russia. All I know is that when they mentioned the Junkyard Dog was going to be in action this week, I thought, oh boy. Well, that means we're going to have to see him without a shirt on. Sure enough, he wrestled Trent Knight in the next match. And, well, yeah. It was JYD in 1988. What you saw is what you got. He looked very plump and soft. I just... You know, it's almost kind of sad reliving this as a fan. Because, like, the first time I really saw JYD wrestle on television, it was somewhere around this time frame, 87, 88. Well before I had ever seen any of his earlier work in Midsouth. Man, just comparing what he looked like physically from 81 and 82, Then you watch him here in 88 and you're like, fuck. It's just depressing. I mean, yeah, he was still the dog. He still did all his signature moves. He was over to an extent. Definitely not on the same level he was several years prior when he was in his true prime. Yeah, it's hard going back and retroactively deconstructing anything Dog did post 84. At least objectively. It was also hard for me to figure out what the fuck they were trying to do in this post-match promo. I don't even know how to explain what was going on here. Ivan Koloff basically thanked the Dog for being his partner for Starrcade, since, Nikita took his ball and went home. So as a way to extend his gratitude, Ivan is making JYD an honorary member of the Soviet Union. To which Dog first responds by asking, huh? Which I also asked. And then he wanted to know if there are any neighborhoods in the Soviet Union, i.e. the hood. And, well, I can definitely assure you, the Soviet Union had plenty of hoods. To about 99% of the fucking country was considered the hood. Then they shook hands and told Paul Jones they needed a bone to chew on. Or something. Well, that was fucking weird. It was one of those promos where you could tell even JR was like, what is going on here? Are we really airing this? Quite frankly, I don't know why they did. And that brought us to the original Midnights beating Rick Allen and Jerry Price in a quick squash. This is great. So the whole premise here was Paulie cutting a promo at the interview booth, essentially working the role of me, the disgruntled wrestling fan in 2024. He begins his promo by calling out the stupidity of Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane doing an entire offensive arsenal comprised of high-risk maneuvers, and the fact that Dennis and Randy taught them all those moves. But they don't do that shit anymore because they're smart. They don't need to rely on going airborne and sacrificing their bodies needlessly to win a match. They now work a technical grappling style. God, that sounds like everything I preached on this channel about the dumb shit we see in today's wrestling. The only difference is the high-risk stuff we see today is actually more dangerous and flat-out phony. Bobby doing elbow and leg drops off the top rope did not expose the business. Corkscrew planches into no-selling backflip spots, that exposes the business. It may work for the Cirque du Soleil crowd. Me, not so much. I also find that very humorous. Paul Heyman going out of his way to make fun of high-risk, dangerous offense. All the while he winds up running one of the most dangerous high-risk wrestling organizations in about 5 years from now, where the entire gimmick was seeing how everybody could outclass the other by needlessly hurting their bodies by falling through furniture and setting everybody on fire. The irony. So anyway, the OG Midnights went over with a leg sweep lariat combo. And I'll say this. It is very interesting when I go back and see Heyman's promo work around this time. We often associate Paul as one of the better promos in today's business, maybe even of all time, especially as a mouthpiece. He was not very good around this time, was he? I mean, he wasn't horrible, but yeah, I don't know, dude. He did not seem all that comfortable as an on-screen promo. I think he was overthinking a lot of this stuff. Like, he was trying too hard to be perfect. He just wasn't naturally witty like Jim Cornette was. He could rant up a storm, no doubt, but it just didn't seem like all of his points stuck the landing. Maybe I'm wrong. Just something that kind of hit me when I was listening to him talk here. Anyway, we had Barry Windham and Ryan Wagner. I laughed when I saw Wagner wearing the exact same ring gear as Windham. No joke. We had two blondes with black ring trunks, red knee pads, and white boots. You literally cannot make that shit up. And the only way to tell them apart was the fact that Barry had like 6 inches on him. And he was in much better ring shape. The match was a total throwaway. I was barely paying attention to it. I was mainly fixated on this Gary Hart promo in picture-in-picture. First of all, why was Gary Hart randomly cutting a heel promo on all the managers? During a Barry Windham squash, no less? I ain't got the first clue. But he was there. And, oh yeah, he's tearing down all the babyface and heel managers. And it gets to the part where he starts going off on Cornette. And I swear to God, I'm not making this up. This is basically what Gary said he was going to do to JC the next time they meet face to face. He was going to lick his finger, stick it inside Cornette's belly button, curl it back and rip out his intestines, and then he was going to kick him in the face. Okay, so hold on a minute here. Let me try to wrap my brain around this real quick. You're going to lick your finger, stick it in Corny's belly button, rip out his guts or whatever, and then you're going to kick him in the face? In that order. I mean, well, I guess hypothetically it's not the most illogical thing in the world. Hilarious, yes, but I'm not entirely sure why you would need to give Corny the wet willy before kicking him in the face. So yeah, that was the Gary Hart cameo for the week. Of all promo material for him to bring up, I was not expecting that one. He caught me very much off guard. So, well, after Barry went over, they pitched back to the booth where he and JJ briefly talked about Bam Bam and Humperdinck. JJ also had brought up the upcoming Bunkhouse Stampede matches for the new year. And I think this is what Gary was alluding to earlier, but they hadn't actually mentioned this yet. I think they end up doing one of those manager battle royals at a couple live events. So they established that. And, well, Barry was super over with the studio crowd this week. You could barely hear anything he was saying in his promo because of all the rabid girls showering him with cheers. Pretty sure he just said he was going to leave Starrcade as a U.S. heavyweight champ. I mean, there's nothing truly groundbreaking about the material, but he was definitely getting the star treatment from the fans this week. Then we had the Texas Broncos going up against Kurt Thompson and Bill Holliday. The Broncos were Dustin Rhodes and Kendall Windham, in case you missed last week's program. It was the official debut for Dustin in the NWA. A very short-lived initial run before he and Dusty leave in January. Dustin was 19 years old when that match was taped. Whew. He tried to look youthful and hip with the blonde mohawk. Can't say it ever really suited his look. A Texas cowboy with a mohawk. It's a little different. But I said last week, it was kind of a cool concept. I like the idea of this tag team. It's just a shame it never went anywhere. The second generation tag team. And Tony and JR definitely put over Kendall's work here, but you could tell they were really engrossed with Dustin. I mean, I think even back then, they saw Dustin and said, he's going to be a big deal. A much bigger deal than Kendall. But they took turns working over Thompson and Holliday. Kendall gave Holliday the bulldog out of the corner, tagged Dustin in so he could hit the bionic elbow drop for the 3. And you know, part of me really wonders, had things not gone down the way they did with Dusty leaving in January, how far would they have gone with Dustin and Kendall as a tag team? Would they actually try to make them the next young, hot duo? Kind of on a similar playing field as what they did with the Fantastics. I don't know, makes you wonder. Because the fans liked them. It's not like they rejected the idea of Dustin being put in this position and then racking up TV wins solely because he was the son of Dusty. I don't think they saw it as a nepotism card. So who knows how far they would have gone if things worked out differently. So then we had Luger at the booth to talk about the world title match with Flair. I find it funny how even Luger's now making open jokes about constantly ripping his shirt off for every promo he does. Not today. It is game mode for Flexi Lexi. He's got to be super serious for this one. And it was kind of the typical stuff we've come to expect with Luger promos. Talks for 45 minutes without actually ever saying much of anything. Uses a bunch of Class A vocabulary that really doesn't get over the way it should. I mean, I really didn't have much to say about this. Again, I still don't think Luger really understands the concept of this title match with Flair for Starrcade. He keeps insinuating that it's no DQ. But it's not a no DQ match. The rules are, if Flair does anything to get himself intentionally disqualified or counted out, then the finish will count as a pinfall. So the belt technically gets awarded to Luger. That is not the same as a no disqualification match. No DQ implies anything goes. That's not the case in this match. Like even JR had to go into damage control mode and make sure everybody knows what the actual stipulation is. It's just... You know, it's everything I talked about when it comes to this feud. Ever since the Bash Tour, the rematch has no buzz. Absolutely zero of this audience actually thinks Luger stands a fucking chance of winning this world title. And it's just a sad reality, dude. They missed the boat in Baltimore when they should have put the belt on Luger. And instead they went with that garbage ref stoppage finish when Luger bladed a pap smear. But it just ruined the whole story. And here we are 6 months later and they're trying to rekindle the feud like it's still white hot. But it's not. It's a sad reality, but you go back in history, this is the track record of every major world title match Luger had throughout his career. Just one stiff-arm treatment after the other. Like every single time they should have capitalized and put the strap on him. They never did. You know, and I think that's why people were genuinely throwing babies in the air when he beat Hogan in like 97 or whenever it was. And that happened on Nitro. I think the title reign lasted like 7 days. But God, people are so happy to finally see Luger win the big one. They didn't give a crap about the fact that Sting was supposed to be the guy to take down Hogan. They were just elated to finally see Luger not get fucked. It only took him another 9 years to get it right with this fucking guy. Unreal. Eddie Gilbert and Mike Jackson. Fine match. Wrestling was good. They also advertised next week. Eddie is apparently getting a title shot against Barry Windham for the U.S. strap. I believe that's technically just days before Barry's title match with Bam Bam at Starrcade. Interesting timing. No, unfortunately, we're not going to review that match because we're going to be doing the Starrcade review next Friday, so there will not be a TBS review next week. You know, it's so weird when I watch Eddie's matches on the studio program. It almost seems like every match has the exact same story going into it. He tries to work a straight match with his opponent, and then at some point the job guy starts getting more physical with Eddie, and it basically leads to both guys getting into a shoving match. Then they start working like an actual grudge feud. And like, you know, the first couple times you see it, you're like, all right, I can sort of get behind this. It adds a little bit of intrigue. This is now like the fourth straight Eddie Gilbert squash where they do the exact same in-ring story. And it's always the opponent that starts shoving Eddie around. Eddie's always the guy just trying to wrestle a clean match. But the jobber's always in there like, put your dukes up, brother. Let's start throwing down. And then Eddie's like, all right, motherfucker, you want to play dirty? We'll play dirty. And again, there's nothing wrong with the concept of it, but it's every Eddie Gilbert match. Like, come on, dude. Play a new tune every so often. I mean, I can respect you wanting to make your matches mean something, but there are other stories you can tell, you know. Anyway, Eddie won with a stun gun. They showed Barry lurking in the shadows watching at one point. It was so dark you literally couldn't tell it was Barry until they zoomed the camera all the way out. It just looked like a black silhouette. And I don't know if that match directly leads to Eddie working a match on the Starrcade card. Actually, he might. He might be in that bunkhouse match. I don't remember. But that match with Barry should be a fun little TV match. Then we had the Commandos beating Eddie Sweat and Randy Mulkey. Hideous match. God-awful. The only highlight was anytime we saw Randy take a bump. The human pincushion. He just... Credit to him. He always made the ass beating look legit. Gotta respect the Mulkeys. They never phoned it in when they had to get thrown around like rag dolls. Although we haven't heard much from Bill Mulkey in the last year, have we? Maybe he finally got confined to an iron lung after all those beatings. Randy's still kicking, though. It was just amazing seeing Randy bump for the Commandos. And then there's Eddie Sweat, who didn't know how to do anything, including bump. probably why they spent the majority of the match working over Randy. Because at least he made their shit look good. But the match still sucked. Commandos won with a running double splash. And then Oliver Humperdinck did a promo talking about the Manager Bunkhouse Battle Royal. And, there wasn't much to anything he said outside wanting to win the $10,000. But then he randomly brings up the possibility that there might be a girl manager booked in the Battle Royal. To which we then got Red Pill Oliver Humperdinck, basically shooting down the concept of women getting physical with grown men in a wrestling ring. How he doesn't like the idea of it. And, well, I can't say I fully disagree. I'm trying to think now. If there was going to be a female manager in the bunkhouse match, it would have had to have been Missy, right? And that's the only female manager I can think of. Baby Doll's basically gone. Nancy doesn't show up until sometime in like late 89, right? But she doesn't even come in as a manager initially. She's one of the plants in the crowd that pretends to be a Rick Steiner fan. And then she turns on him eventually and aligns with Kevin Sullivan. Yeah, I don't know who else that would be. He has to be talking about Missy. God, the idea of Missy Hyatt being in a battle royal with the likes of Gary Hart. Fucking Paul Ellering. Yeah. How about no? Pretty sure that doesn't actually happen. And if it does, I hope to God they don't air it live. If they still want to maintain their credibility as an organization. No, we had the best part of the show. Maybe the best moment in the history of studio wrestling, for all I know. Leave it to Rick Steiner and Jim Ross to put a smile on my bitter, peeved old face. I'm a sucker for animals, man. And when Steiner shows up here for a promo holding a dog, I was like, all right. Steiner won me over. This wasn't Arnold, was it? Nah, Arnold was Scotty's dog. I know Arnold was a pit bull. I'm not sure what kind of breed of dog this was. It kind of looked like a pit bull of some description. Maybe it was Arnold, and I just don't remember what he looked like. And we didn't see him on camera that frequently, but this might have been the real deal. We may have gotten an Arnold cameo here in 1988. It's great, too, because from the moment he's on camera, the dog's going ballistic for JR, just sticking his paws out and wanting Jim to pet him. So, I mean, Rick is fucking crazy. He passes the dog to JR so he can go to the ring to wrestle his match. JR is just standing there holding his dog in one arm, holding the mic down and seeing if the dog wanted to cut a promo. JR just looks back at the camera and shakes his head. Like, he was trying to play it so serious, but you knew JR was having a ball out there. This is the highlight of his run in Crockett up to this point. So, of course, Tony's immediately making jokes about the dog using JR as a tree stump if he's not careful. I'm sure JR appreciated that comment. Meanwhile, we go to the ring. There's Rick Steiner wrestling with a fucking Santa hat on, playing around with George South here. Then at one point he takes off his hat and puts it over Teddy Long's head. It's just like, I mean, this entire segment was a train wreck. There's so much fucking chaos going on here. I think at one point the dog accidentally gets loose from JR and starts running around the studio. So you got all these fans reaching out trying to grab him or whatever. So Rick eventually grabs him and takes him back to Jim. Then he proceeds to yell at him for being a terrible dog sitter. JR goes, "Yeah, I've held a lot of dogs in my day." Tony responds with, "You sure have, Jim." So, again, the people in the studio are going nuts. Rick at the very end brings in one of the kids from the front row to help double team on George South. Of course, Teddy sees it and doesn't call for the DQ. He's just like, what the fuck is happening right now? And, well, Steiner eventually won with a belly-to-belly, at which point, I believe the dog broke free again and then started running out of the room a second time. Yeah, Rick was right. JR was terrible at babysitting this dog. He had one job. By far the highlight of the whole segment. Jim Ross with the quote of the fucking century. The moment we all knew as fans, this company is so fucked. Quote, "Folks, it'll probably get better. Maybe not. But we'll be back." And scene. The slapstick portion of this week's program brought to you in part by the dog-faced gremlin. Never a dull moment when Rick Steiner's on camera. Then we come back for Mike Rotunda and Dr. Death versus Randy Hogan and Gary Royal. We did have some slapstick comedy in this segment as well. Mostly anytime Randy Hogan fed or bumped for the Varsity Club. It's comically terrible. I especially laughed anytime they gave Randy a shoot-off spot. I swear to God, it took Randy about 50 steps to run to hit the ropes and back. The most uncoordinated job guy since Don Valentine. Couple good heel lines from Sullivan here too. There's a moment where Jim's putting over Dr. Death's football credentials, but then Sullivan stops him and tells him to mention the real credential that nobody properly ever talks about. To which JR says, "He holds the record for the most amount of unnecessary roughness penalties." And Sullivan just cackles. He is so proud that Dr. Death holds the record for being the biggest asshole on the football field. Gotta love it. So, Rotunda eventually put Randy away with a butterfly suplex. They are trying so hard to paint the illusion that Rick Steiner stands no chance of walking out of Starrcade as a new TV champion. And it's like, I mean, there's telegraphing a finish to the point of absurdity. And then there's whatever in the hell they're doing with the Steiner-Rotunda feud. To the point where if Steiner doesn't walk out as a new champion, I think the people would have set the seats on fire. I mean, everybody expected the guy to win. It was just the whole idea of, Steiner, you can't win. Because you're an idiot. And Rotunda's not. As if IQ points are what solely dictates how you win a match in pro wrestling. You know, in most cases that might be true. But when you're Rick fucking Steiner, no, all bets go out the window. So then we had Ric Flair at the booth. It was literally every Ric Flair is the National Wrestling Alliance, Ric Flair is Starrcade, Ric Flair is the best promo. I wrote nothing else down about it. Very cut and dry. I mean, I love Rick, but there's only so many ways you can regurgitate the same promo material before you run out of ways to talk about it. Then we had Sting beating Keith Steinborn. Sting looked absolutely jacked here. You could tell he was pumping iron overtime at the gym. Just muscling around Steinborn like he was nothing. Locked him in the Scorpion Deathlock and got the submission win. And then he let JR know afterwards that he's hunting Road Warriors. Yup, that was the thing. A literal 10-second Elmer Fudd impersonation. That was how he sold the tag match with the Road Warriors for Starrcade. And it worked. That's the amazing part. Because he's Sting. And when you're over like a guy like Sting was, you could say and do whatever the fuck you wanted. And then with about 5 minutes left in the program, the Road Warriors came out and quickly disposed of JC Wild and Max Miles. Then they do a show-closing promo by basically talking about what drives them and motivates them in the sport of wrestling. As Paul Ellering noted here, hate. That's the driving force. Hate, money, and greed. Hawk said they don't care about family, pets, and friends. They only care about their trio. And come Starrcade, they're going to see what Sting and Dusty are made of when they have to meet the Road Warriors face to face. And, well, that was basically the show. It was 90 minutes of them trying to get people to really care about this Starrcade pay-per-view. Are you hyped? Are you excited? I don't know. It's kind of a mixed bag for me. You know, again, we've covered the road to how they even got to this pay-per-view. It's not a bad card on paper. But, you know, we're also in the new regime now. You can already tell that with Dusty being blackballed as Booker, 89 is very much up in the air creatively. And we know what happens. Jim Crockett comes in as the interim booker while we wait for George South to come in and fuck things up 6 ways from Sunday. There's a lot of turnover. And like you could tell right off the bat, the early to mid part of 89 is an absolutely terrible time for WCW. And I'll just go ahead and spoil it because, I mean, you'll be able to tell by the time we start really diving into new things here. But the early to mid part of 89 is an absolutely terrible time for WCW. Between the talent turnover and the new management conversion, there's a lot of crap that goes down in just the first few months of the new year. And it might not seem too obvious from right out of the gate, but we're already seeing some of these new production changes with the new regime. And we're just talking like small, minute production changes. Cutting back on promo time. But it's a substantial change. It's kind of making the studio shows lackluster. But it only gets worse from here, ladies and gents. Starrcade 88 is truly the end of an era. Meanwhile, Midsouth is approaching the beginning of a new era. The peak era. Prime years in Midsouth television. Now, last week they really dedicated the bulk of the program to Krusher Darsow. He showed up with a new look, a fresh buzz cut. He's now sporting the Russian-colored red ring trunks for his matches. And he has essentially turned his back on his American comrades in order to side with Nikolai Volkoff and adopt the Russian belief system. And if you watched last week, we heard Bill Watts share plenty of his opinion on the full detail. The entire 40-minute program last week was him burying Russia and talking about how they're all backstabbing, bootlicking commies. If anyone questioned where Bill stood on the political end of the spectrum, you were given full clarity last week. And the big angle they replayed at the top of the program this week was the interview between Jim Ross and Darsow, where JR gave Darsow one more chance to set the record straight, to prove that he's not betraying his American roots. Of course, that's where Darsow suggested that America's done nothing for him. JYD did nothing for him in Midsouth. He treated him like a piece of nothing, I believe the exact quote was. And so that led to him and Dog getting into their confrontation, where Dog told Darsow that he wanted him to start from the bottom and work his way up just like everybody else has done throughout wrestling. No handouts. But then, of course, Volkoff got involved. He and Dog started trading blows. And that's where Darsow, well, at first he was a little conflicted about the matter, but then he helped Volkoff attack Dog and basically submit that he's a full-blown Russian sympathizer. So, as you'd imagine, a full week removed from Darsow turning his back on the people, not to mention him being presented with the Soviet flag from Nikolai as a gift, well, the Shreveport fans responded by breaking out some American flags and waving them around in the Russians' faces this week, chanting, USA, USA. It was a very patriotic crowd this week, as you could imagine. So Darsow wrestled Coco Ware. While Darsow's working over Coco, Bill Watts, surprise, surprise, he's talking about war bonds and Russian missiles. Like, not even trying to objectively call the match. It's funny because the whole squash only went like 90 seconds. But it's like Bill had to make sure he got in his political pot shots this week. Hey, whatever you want to say about the whole thing, though, it's got a ton of heat. And I still stand by everything I said about Darsow turning heel and signing with Volkoff. You know, that was one of the best career moves he made. He just never resonated as a bland white meat babyface from Minnesota. It was never going to work. But as soon as he dropped the Daisy Dukes and cut his hair, they stuck him with Nikolai and had them sport the Soviet flag everywhere they went. Now that got him over as a heel. And now the people actually care to see him get his ass kicked. So then we had Jim Neidhart versus Mr. Wrestling 2. Interesting scenario at play here when you consider these two both represent one half of the top two teams in Midsouth. A little bit of foreshadowing for the angle they set up at the end of the match, which I think everybody saw coming a mile away. The match itself was pretty boring, all things considered. Didn't really pick up until the ref bump spot with Pee Wee Anderson, which may have been the greatest ref bump I've ever seen in my life. Before we talk about that, I did have to point out an interesting comment from Watts during this match. In his random topics of conversation to bring up, he mentioned something about Jimmy Carter's wife being a huge Wrestling 2 fan. It apparently led to former President Carter taking a picture with Wrestling 2 at a local live event, or I think even said the Carter family actually came to visit. Not sure what specific town that would have been in. I was not able to confirm nor deny that that picture exists anywhere. I was not able to find a pic of Jimmy Carter posing with Mr. Wrestling 2 for a photo op. But, well, if there's one thing we do know, there's a strange yet heavy connection between former presidents and professional wrestling. I mean, they are basically one and the same art form. I know the Bushes were big fans of wrestling back in the 80s. They used to attend the Houston Coliseum events whenever Bosch was promoting there. I think Bill Clinton was a big fan. Obviously Trump, that goes without saying. I mean, Jimmy Carter was a very shitty president, but it's good to see he had good taste in pro wrestlers. So the rev bump with Pee Wee, this outstanding piece of business. 2 is setting up for the running knee lift, but as he comes charging toward Neidhart essentially cradles Pee Wee in his arms and throws him directly into Wrestling 2, at which point Pee Wee takes a flip bump and lands right on his hip and tailbone. I was like, well, first, how did this man not die? Of course, while he's down selling, and runs Butchery to help Neidhart gang up on Wrestling 2, so that way Magnum can run out and even the odds at the very end. Cold spot where Magnum gave Reed the running knee lift to counter the heels double team. That obviously plays into the story they've been telling with 2's training, him teaching Magnum all of his signature moves. And you get the very cathartic payoff at the end where 2 gives Neidhart the knee lift, covers him for the 1-2-3. Then Magnum's on the floor holding back Butchery with a folding chair. A lot of activity going on here, but it was a great segment. And you can see what they're setting up for the next major title feud. And obviously that's going to be the moment where Magnum and Wrestling 2 become the new Mid-South Tag Team Champions as we move into 84. And they slowly start introducing the Midnights as the next top heel group. It does appear they've officially dropped the stuff with the Poffo family. So Watts must have finally settled on the fact that Randy wasn't coming in, that they weren't going to move forward with that program. We're shifting gears and moving straight into the title program. We will see how things develop in the coming weeks. On the subject of the Midnights, they got a quick win over George Weingroff and Randy Barber. Shout out to JC for checking his hair on the hard cam side during JR's ring intros. I didn't write down what Corny said for the ring intros with the Midnights. All I know is he mentioned something about comparing the Midnights to thunderstorms and dark brewing clouds. I just thought, not one of Corny's better analogies he's come up with. Seriously, I had no idea where he was going with any of that. For all I know, he could have been getting ready to compare them to explosive diarrhea. Because when you're talking about thunderstorms and ominous dark clouds, knowing the impending doom that awaits, I mean, I could easily chalk that up to gastrointestinal problems. So the Midnights won with their Doomsday combo. Really didn't write much else down. Again, we're still in the prelim phase of trying to establish the Midnights on television with the crowd. They're obviously heels, but in terms of them engaging with any of the top names yet, we're still a few weeks out because, again, we're still trying to get them over. Then we had JYD beating King Carl Fergie in a short match. I find it ironic that on the same show they were advertising Jerry Lawler for the card. They had to make sure they booked the Walmart brand version of Lawler in the form of Carl Fergie. I actually looked this up too because I was curious here. I wanted to see if there was any connection between Fergie and Lawler. Like, why was Fergie deliberately ripping off Lawler's gimmick? Turns out they were cousins. I shit you not, I had no clue. So Lawler must have given him his blessing. I vaguely recall Fergie becoming a referee later on for Midsouth. But, yeah, I had no idea he and Lawler were related. This also ended up becoming a comically great segment when you factor in that Carl Fergie is supposed to be the bootleg version of the actual star, Jerry Lawler. He's... I mean, he's not uncoordinated. He's also not a fluid worker. So you get this great spot at the end where he's trying to showboat and just be a heel. He's just yucking it up for the crowd. He goes for a middle rope elbow drop on a dog. And I know for a fact this was not deliberate because I watched it back several times just to check. As Fergie goes to drop the elbow, he legitimately slips on the middle rope and eats shit. And Dog just stands up and looks down at him like, what a goddamn idiot. Of course, the crowd's laughing because the heel made an ass of himself. Then Dog just picked him up and won with a thump. I then rewound the segment one more time to watch Carl Fergie slip on the middle rope and fall. After the 7th viewing, it was still as funny as the first time I saw it. Dog's reaction did not help my composure. But, yeah, that was more fun than it had any right to be. And then we come back to get the real deal. It is Lawler versus Larry Higgins. And this is kind of interesting timing with Lawler coming into work in Midsouth here. Obviously he wasn't a mainstay for Watts. But I'm trying to think of the timeline. We're obviously a couple years removed from the Andy Kaufman stuff in Memphis. Watts talked about that a little bit here. I remember Lawler was working for Vern in the AWA for a brief window. Sometime in 83, I think it was. Because he had that big feud with Austin Idol early on and then eventually did the program with Dundee. So this must have been right around the time he wrapped up there. Of course, with a name like Lawler, you often wonder why he didn't stick around and do more business with Watts. I don't know if that had something to do with the talent exchange deal going on between him and Jerry Jarrett. Maybe Jarrett didn't want to loan him his top star for more dates than absolutely necessary. But it's not like there was a strict code of, you can't have Memphis stars working for Mid-South television shows. Because there was still a working agreement there. I don't know. And it was just a simple get-over match. Lawler dominated the whole thing. He won in very convincing fashion. The people were obviously behind him. He was a massive babyface by this period. It's so crazy when you think about just how much impact that Kaufman feud had. 2 years later, and it's still something people talk about as a pivotal needle mover in wrestling history. And it was. Even people that weren't wrestling fans growing up have some basic knowledge of the Andy Kaufman-Jerry Lawler feud. I knew about that shit by the time I was like 4 or 5 years old. And I'm a late bloomer. I'm one of those late millennial generations that people often so criticize. But I still remember reading about that stuff in magazine articles. It's just... It's amazing when you look back and realize that how wrestling used to be so much part of the mainstream. You know, back when not everybody knew it was a work. Which is the genius of the Kaufman-Lawler feud. The fact that they kayfabed the fuck out of that story for years. You would never think to see anything like that in the modern era. God, remember when Tony Khan was wearing a neck brace everywhere he went after they shot the angle with the Elite on television that never went anywhere? When they pow drove Tony and left him in a heap? There's Tony doing press scrums looking like the biggest fucking tool on the planet. You know, smiling and just letting everybody know it's a gag. What a geek. Absolute fucking mark. And not the good kind of mark. The kind of mark that makes you question your loyalty to the business. So then we had Nikolai, Volkoff, and Hacksaw Duggan. Another great segment on this week's program. I don't remember if they advertised this last week, but we do know Duggan's been heavily involved with the Russians as of late. You know, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier with the Wrestling 2 Neidhart match. You know, the action's pretty unnoteworthy until the last few minutes when they finally pick things up a little bit. You get Duggan missing a charge and falling out to the floor, so that way Darsow can run over and trap Duggan in the over-the-shoulder bear hug while Volkoff has the ref. I will say, it does make you wonder how the ref can't just turn around and blatantly see Darsow holding another man upside down over his shoulder for more than 5 seconds. It was kind of ridiculous. Like, I mean, it's not like Darsow was choking Duggan with a foreign object or anything. In any case, they have Volkoff get Duggan up for the big power slam. But then Duggan takes a shot of his own and gouges Volkoff's eyes to break up the pin attempt. And that sets up the angle where Darsow and Volkoff try to double team Duggan. But right before the Russians can do any more damage, it's when all the top babyfaces run down to send the heels powdering. I did kind of shake my head at the visual of Lanny Poffo being out there with guys like Magnum and Wrestling 2 and JYD. Like, no offense to Lanny or anything, but like, I mean, that's the equivalent to doing a run-in save with Hogan, Savage, Warrior, and I don't know, Tito Santana. Or fucking Bad News Brown. One of these is not like the others. Maybe Lanny just figured, fuck it, I'm working the next match anyway, so I may as well just run down and pretend to help. As far as Tom Lentz and Doug Vines versus Rick Rude and Lanny goes, you know, the big story here was Watts barely being able to talk. His voice was totally shot from screaming about everything we saw previously on the program. It was good placement for a standby, though, because it gave Watts plenty to talk about. Hoarse voice and all. The big match they're trying to sign for next week is Darsow versus Duggan. Not officially set in stone yet, but Grizzly Smith is trying to get that match booked. Which basically means it's set in stone. Yeah, nothing wrong with anything they did here, but it was what it was. Lenny and Rick did some quirky-looking double-team stuff at the end, including Lanny shooting Rick off into the ropes so he could hit Doug Vines with a flying crossbody. I guess he just assumed Doug was going to be in position to take this crossbody after Lanny had already done the shoot-off spot. Luckily, everybody was in position. Funny how things work like that. But man, you could tell they're totally scrambling to find something for Lanny to do now. Now that this Poffo versus Magnum and 2 storyline fell through. He's just back to being another prelim guy. I think next week they said he's going to be teaming with the Iceman, which is completely random. But they are wrestling Butch Reed and Jim Neidhart, so it's not a total throwaway. I think overall, a lot of good stuff happening this week. Shot some great angles, kept moving things forward in the Russia versus America saga. And you can tell the Darsow Volkoff stuff is taking precedence over a lot of other things right now. There's nothing wrong with that. If you have too much stuff going on every week, it's hard to keep track of everything. What I like is that they're incorporating pretty much all of the top babyfaces in that story in some way, shape, or form. I think at first it was mainly JYD and Duggan that were the adversaries going after Volkoff and Darsow. But they changed it up a little bit this week. They threw Magnum and Wrestling 2 into the mix. And while those two technically have their sights set on the World Tag titles, they're still involved in wanting to stand up and help fight off the Russians as needed. So it's good that it's not just a Russia versus these 2 American challengers of the month kind of story. It's Russia versus all American challengers. And that's the kind of thing you like to see. Where everyone's on the same page and watching each other's backs. Though at least the baby faces are. The heels not so much. They got their own priorities. Alright, so I actually had to stop and double check my dates when I started watching World Class this week. I know it's just kind of accepted that the regional belts in Dallas are constantly changing hands. Like sometimes they'll show a replay to let us know how a belt switched over. Other times not so much. It has gone to a point now, specifically with the Texas heavyweight title, I am completely out to lunch. I can usually sort of track who the tag team and American heavyweight champions are if I'm paying really close attention. The Texas title, dude, fuck if I remember who the previous 3 champions were. I saw the Grappler in the ring with the belt this week. After confirming that I wasn't accidentally watching a tape show from, say, 1986, I just went, fine. I'm not even going to bother asking anymore. The Grappler has mysteriously become the Texas heavyweight champion. And I do not care one iota. That is the reality of where we are with World Class. Once upon a time, I'd have been digging in and trying to figure out who the previous champion was, because I had to know. Now I'm just like, okay, sure, whatever. It's not like it matters. So the Grappler wrestled Tommy Montana, I believe, and again, this is just me spitballing off memory here. I believe the match at the Thanksgiving Star Wars special was Brian Adias and Jack Victory for the Texas title, correct? It was either that or the American heavyweight title, but I'm pretty sure Rick Rude is the American heavyweight champion right now. Which then makes me wonder, moreover, when the fuck did the Grappler become the Texas heavyweight champion when we literally just saw a tape match with Adias and Victory for the title less than a week ago? Again, I don't know what's going on anymore. It really doesn't make any sense. I mean, in all fairness, they do basically have to do a quick turnaround to hard sell this Christmas Day Star Wars special they're doing in less than a week. I mean, if you really think about it, they only had about 4 weeks to promote everything between Thanksgiving and Christmas, just to even come up with a full card. So that might explain the rapid-fire title switch, just to maybe give Adias a new opponent and a chance to chase after the belt. The action's fine. Montana got some hope spots here and there, but Grappler still went over very convincingly with a fallaway slam. Really nothing more to say about it. It was a match. And in terms of the big main events they're building up for the Christmas special, well, at least we know what the deal was with Terry Gordy flipping out in the cage last week. The reason he shot off at the Von Erichs and left high and dry when he was supposed to be refereeing. Turns out they were setting up a 6-man tag for the Christmas main event, which I had no memory of. I did not know they brought the Freebirds back at the end of '85. That's a revelation for me. They're once again going back to the well with a long-time rivalry. The Freebirds and the Von Erichs. A heated feud reborn. Again. I mean, I guess if you're world class in 1985 and you're seeing the direction of where the product's headed since the Freebirds left the promotion sometime in '84, I don't necessarily blame Fritz for wanting to go back in this direction. It was hot once upon a time, so damn it, let's try it again and rekindle that spark. But you know the funny thing? It actually worked temporarily. But I'm pretty sure this is like a one-and-done blow-off. And like, you can call it whatever you want. Hotshot booking, trying to harken back to a time when business was actually booming in Dallas. You know, the whole tape they showed here with the Freebirds showing up at Fort Worth unannounced and then going after Kevin and Kerry, it was a big surprise that nobody saw coming. I think Mercer said they had been beefing over the 6-man titles in Atlanta around this time, so it was only fitting they showed up in Texas to return the favor eventually. But man, you go back and you watch this brawl, you seeing how the fans are reacting to everything. God, it's like watching 1983 all over again. And it was a great heat angle, but like, we were 2 years removed from the biggest money-drawing feud they ever did in World Class. When you see something like this as a smarter fan, the only thing you wonder is, are we just retreading old stomping grounds? And you just think about it too contextually. You remember they shot that big angle months ago when Terry sort of buried the hatchet with Kerry on television? You know, trying to let bygones be bygones after all that crap they put each other through over the years. Well, now they're just kind of walking that back. Now, of course, you can argue the hotshot booking call was beneficial in terms of helping to sell last-minute tickets for the Reunion Arena show. And again, it all kind of goes back to that quick turnaround between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Because if you really think about it, what is the hot feud right now? You know, what's the big money match that fans are going to go out of their way to buy tickets to see? There really aren't that many. You know, and of course, with David not being a central piece to this, that meant they had to stick Lance in there to be the third partner. And all it does is bring back even sadder memories. And like, I know that's not their intent, but because we reviewed the entirety of 1983 and 84 for World Class, the truth is we've seen the peak years. the single hottest feud in wrestling, period. The Freebirds and the Von Erichs. Nothing has ever come close to this feud since. It's a timeless classic that every wrestling fan knows about to at least some degree. But it's been well over a year since they even touched that story. And to bring it back here at the end of the year with very little hype or fanfare, it just doesn't have the same energy it did a few years back. Like, even the Freebirds promo afterwards just made you think, fuck. I wish we could see more stuff like this in Dallas again. You know, like that pre-tape with Hayes, Gordy, and Roberts, them shooting their mouths off of the Von Erichs and saying they felt the brunt of what happens when you step on the Freebirds. You know, obviously the whole thing is about the six-man titles. God, you listen to Hayes cut this promo, though. Man, remember when we used to get promos like this every week on World Class? Gordy, same deal. And like, I know Buddy Roberts was never much of a promo himself, but even he had some witty lines occasionally. God, I wish we could go back and relive those great Freebird Von Erichs moments again. I mean, as overplayed as all those matches were, they had a formula, and they drew. But now we're here in 1985, going into 86, after things have massively cooled off, and truth is, it's a different company now. I mean, yeah, we'll get to see the Freebirds and the Von Erichs again, but is there a ton of heat for it? Because it kind of depends who you ask. So then we had Gino Hernandez and Chris Adams versus Brian Adias and Mark Youngblood. The now maskless Gino and Chris. They had their masks removed in the cage with the Von Erichs. They've grown back pretty much all their hair by this point. So you can't refer to them as bald-headed geeks anymore. I think this is the match where I noticed a huge gap in the size of the crowd from the hard cam side. And you could see empty bleachers on like the top 2 or 3 rows. And I know it's the holiday season, but it was very noticeable. More noticeable than it has been previously. It's an alright tag match. I'm not really sure if Youngblood is really resonating with the Dallas crowd yet. I mean, they like Adias, but they're a little lukewarm for Youngblood. Not sure if that ever changes any. But it was a pretty simple story. Chris and Gino took turns working over Youngblood early on. Adias got a brief hot tag, but wound up getting cut off by the heels again. There was some good underhanded double teaming from Gino and Chris. I did wince at the spot right before the Youngblood hot tag. Adias goes to shake the ropes to try to crotch Chris, and then Chris comes down and lands right on top of Adias' ankle. I was like, fuck. But then Adias just got up and he seemed to be perfectly fine. He wasn't limping. Must have had a steel plate put in his foot. And I actually thought the finish was pretty clever. Youngblood has Chris stacked up in a pinning predicament, but because he was too close to the heel corner, Gino just reached over and punched Youngblood in the face when he wasn't looking. And then Chris rolled up Youngblood by his tights and stole the pin. It was so crafty, but so basic. Gino's entire thought process was, well, he's right there. I have the perfect opportunity to cheap shot him. Not going to pass up on that. It was a lengthy tag match, but, you know, this is always kind of the genius when it comes to Chris and Gino tag matches. They're never boring. You never tire on watching Gino and Chris be despicable bad guys. even with the new hairdos. So then we had a quick replay from the Star Wars special from the cage. They replayed the closing moments of the John Tatum-Scott Casey match, mainly focusing on the afterbirth when the Great Kabuki showed up and attacked Casey. You remember the whole story was Kabuki was supposed to be in Japan, but then he swerved everybody by showing up to attack Scott. And we know they've been feuding since the Cotton Bowl fallout. And, well, I'll say one thing about this ringside interview with Sunshine and Casey. The creep machine Bill Mercer just couldn't help himself but try to hit on Sunshine during what's supposed to be a serious interview, noting her sparkling blue eyes. You just see Sunshine kind of scowl at him sideways like, dude, come on, seriously? You're flirting with me when I'm in a bad mood? Well, clearly Sunshine doesn't understand men very well. But of course, that set up the TV main event. The Iceman and Scott Casey going up against the missing link in the Great Kabuki. I will immediately forego the conversation of, when in the hell did Kabuki become an honorary member of Percy's dynasty? Even though it does kind of fit well with the group. But they did confirm the match for Christmas Star Wars here. It will be a mixed tag match. Sunshine and Scott wrestling Missy Hyatt and John Tatum. So we'll finally get some proper closure to that rivalry. As for this match, well, we got some wrestling. Or in the case of Link, according to Mercer, some banging. That does describe Link's offense very effectively. He does a lot of banging. As usual, Percy's a gem. He's out on the floor being the best heat magnet, with his jacket that reads on the back, Mama's Pride and Joy. The literal definition of a face only a mother could love. So they're having the match. The heels are working over Casey at the end. At some point it breaks down with all four guys. And then Percy just hits the ring apron and clocks Casey over the back of the head with his cane. Then we had this post-match deal, which was, well, it all but confirmed a missing link face turn, which is basically where I was figuring they were going a few weeks ago when he and Percy were butting heads, literally and figuratively. So here's how they set the angle up. Kabuki throws Sunshine to the ground, and the missing link sees this from across the ring. He apparently has a trigger mechanism for male-on-female violence all of a sudden. So he runs over and takes out Kabuki with a headbutt. Now at first, Mercer tries to sell it like it was an accident, which was, albeit kind of silly. It in no way looked accidental. But then you see Percy try to talk some sense into him, which leads to Link grabbing a hold of Percy and then giving him a headbutt. By that point, he's just literally headbutting anything in sight, not named Sunshine. I guess you could also say he was giving head. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. So, yeah, the missing link gives everybody head. Then he goes over and picks up Sunshine from the timekeeper table, carries her to the back in order to presumably have sex with her. And that was the end of the show. The missing link kidnapped Sunshine and effectively walked away with her to do his thing. Maybe a little Boom, chicka wow. Boom, chicka bang, the bang, the bang. Chicka bang, the bang, the bang. I guess we'll have to wait and see. If we come back next week and we see the missing link, we ought to assume Sunshine didn't press charges. You know, it was a strange ending to the program, but, I mean, you could tell how quickly they had to finalize this Christmas Star Wars card. I mean, the obvious draw is the Freebirds Von Erich six-man tag. Not really sure if the missing link face turn will directly factor into the Star Wars special or not. But, I mean, overall, not a bad show. I know we're grading on a curve these days with World Class. I mean, you really got the nostalgia factor seeing the pre-tape with the Von Erichs and the Freebirds doing their brawl. Really brought you back to when we used to see these hot angles every week. It was just kind of built into the cake. It's a shame this is only really a one-time blow-off. But again, if the goal is to sell a hot match for the end of the year, I guess you can't go wrong with another Freebird versus Von Erich six-man. Even if one of the Von Erichs is Lance. But I think we got one more week of the classic reviews for this year, and then we'll knock out another library. It's a lot of wrestling we've covered. So, just trying to map my schedule out here. So, do I have... Hang on a sec. I just realized that I don't have anything to talk about for this Monday. Because we don't have Retro Raw, because there's not going to be another episode until the start of the new year. Holy cow. Well, I do know for a fact that I need to start piecing things together for the end of the year special. And I was planning to do that on the 30th. Huh. I just realized that. Oh, in an ideal world, it would be nice to take the week off for Christmas, but y'all know how I like torturing myself. So we'll see. There will definitely be a Friday show next week because we got to wrap out the remainder of the territory shows, and we also have the Starrcade review we have to do. So maybe that's what I'll spend this weekend doing, is watching Starrcade. But as far as Monday goes, I don't know if we're going to have an episode or not, because I got nothing to review. So we might just take that day off, which will give me a longer weekend, and certainly not going to complain about that. But definitely keep on your radar the end of the year special, because we got some topics to cover. I might even maybe consider doing a short Monday show just to kind of keep you in the loop of what I'm actually going to talk about. Or we'll see. Maybe I'll break it up. Maybe I'll do my top matches on the Monday show this coming weekend, and the next week I'll kind of save for any end of the year discussions I want to have. Just general thoughts on wrestling, plans that I might have in the next year. We'll see. I haven't really figured that out yet. But until then, thanks everybody for watching, and I'll talk to y'all soon. Take care. Peace out.